Good morning. Today is Sunday, Gimel Kislev Tovshin Ayin Tes. We are in Teres Menachem Sefer Mamorim Tovshin Yud Gimel in the Maimer of Shabbos Parshas Shlach Mevorchim Achedesh Tammuz Tovshin Yud Gimel. The Dibur HaMaschel is Vayihiyu Bnei Yisroel Bamidbar. We are on page Kuf Ayin Ches at the paragraph beginning V'chein. The Rebbe is addressing the episode in the Torah in the Parsha of Shlach of the Mekoshesh Eitzim, the gatherer of the wood. The Rebbe brought, of course, the simple definition of this is that he was gathering wood on Shabbos, which is prohibited. The Zohar says that this Mekoshesh is from the expression of hekesh, comparing. He was comparing trees. Which trees was he comparing? The Eitz Hadas and the Eitz HaChaim, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life that we know about from Pashas Bereishis in the Gan Eden, when Hashem put Adam and Chava in Gan Eden and told them not to eat from the tree of knowledge. And he was comparing which one was greater. The Rebbe went into a whole discussion about that, and he concluded that we must say that the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge in its own right, is in the domain of holiness, of Kedusha. Otherwise it would not be situated. It would not be situated in Gan Eden. Gan Eden doesn't tolerate anything that's not holy. It's just that through a myriad of descents, and as the Eitz Hadas, what the tree of knowledge represents, the godly level, the holy level that it represents, through a myriad, when that descends and contracts and is reduced through a myriad of levels in the chain order of creation, of Ishtalshalus, something negative can come out from it. In order to explain that, the Rebbe began to explain the whole idea of serving Hashem. Because the question the Rebbe asked was, the Targum Yerushalmi says that whoever eats from the Eitz Hadas, whoever would eat from the Eitz Hadas would know how to discern between good and bad. So the question was, what's so terrible about that? That's the whole point of serving Hashem, to discern between good and bad, and to choose the good. So the Rebbe said, to understand this, we need to understand the whole idea of serving Hashem. And he said that there are two modes of serving Hashem, in a limited way and in an unlimited way. And these two modes are at every stage of serving Hashem, in the actual service of Hashem, in the preparation to our service of Hashem, as we contemplate and we put ourselves in the mode of serving Hashem, and also in the divine celestial attributes above, in the upper realms, in the spiritual realms, that are affected through our service of Hashem. And he began first by addressing how these two modes of serving Hashem, the limited and unlimited, express themselves in the actual service of Hashem. And he explained that in Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasodim. He started from Gemilas Chasodim, in acts of loving kindness, how we have these two modes. He went on to Tefillah, prayer, which is Avodah, how we find these two modes, and also in Torah, how we find these two modes. Because these three areas of serving Hashem, Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasodim, of course, are the three pillars upon which the entire world stands, and encapsulates in it, all the totality of our service of Hashem. Now the Rebbe moves on to the next stage. Also in Midos, meaning in the emotional aspects of our soul, as we engage in the service of Hashem with the emotional aspects of our soul, we also find these two modes of service, meaning the limited and the unlimited. Page Kuf Ayin Ches at the paragraph, the first V'chein. If you see, there are three V'cheins on this page, right? Looks like the davening of Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. But it's the first one on the top of the page, 4 lines from the top. V'chein hu gam b'inyan hamidos. So too it is also concerning the emotions of the person, the emotional aspects of the person, which are what? What are the emotional aspects of the person that we engage in? That we engage when we serve Hashem? It's Ava V'yira, love and fear of Hashem. Now, I just want, before we go on, to point out that in a previous Maimer, it was actually in the last Maimer. It seems to me, even though it doesn't say it so explicitly, that this Maimer, it's not an actual hemshech, continuation from the previous Maimer, but the Rebbe is addressing some elements that he touched upon or he discussed in the previous Maimer. In the previous Maimer, the Rebbe was addressing Doimim Tzemech Chayin Medaber, if you remember. The inanimate, the vegetable, the animal, and the human. And he explained that also in Avodas Hashem, in man's service of Hashem. And he explained that in terms of the midos of the person. The natural midos, or the doimim was just doing things by rote, without any feeling or emotion or anything, like a daimon. It's inanimate. It's not alive. You do it. Then there was serving Hashem as a tzemeach. What was that? Av v'yira tiviyim. Right? Natural love and fear of Hashem. Which is alive, but it's in one place. It can't move from place to place. And it grows only in relation to its own environment. In other words, it grows in a measured way. Then there's Avav, but there's no fundamental change. Avav Yira Sichliim, he went on, intellectual love and fear of Hashem. In other words, love and fear that emanates and comes as a result of contemplation of the greatness of Hashem. That's called Avav Yira Sichliim. That love and fear is far greater, far more expanded than the natural love. And that's Chai. The Chai aspect, the animal level in the four categories of the Mitzvah Chai Medaber. So the Rebbe over here is also addressing Avav Yira Tiviyim. The next section is going to express, he's going to touch upon Avav Yira. Doesn't call it Avav Yira Sichlim, but it's his bonus, Hamevil Avav Yira, the contemplation that brings to love and fear. And in the next section, he's going to address Avav Yira, or Avav that's known as Re'usa de Liba, the desire of the heart. I have to say that the sugya, the subject of Avav Yira in Chassidus, is a very fascinating one, and is a vast one. And I will try to, because the difficulty is this: it's discussed in different places in Chassidus in different ways. Just as an example, when you talk about Avav, natural love and fear of Hashem, and you talk about love and fear of Hashem that emanates from contemplation, and then you talk about Re'usa de Liba, the desire of the heart that comes from the essence of the soul, let's use those terms, it lends itself to focus on a very basic posuk that we say I don't mean basic in the sense of quality, I mean to say a very common posuk that we say every single day, a number of times in davening. V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, you should love Hashem your God, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol ma'idecha, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. What are these three levels? They're not just repeating the same thing. So it would seem that Avav Yira, Tiviyim, Sichlim, and Re'usa de Liba, these three levels correspond to the b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol ma'idecha. Indeed, in some places in Chassidus it explains that that's the case. The Rebbe doesn't quote it here, so far as I can see. In other words, in correspondence to these three levels that are enumerated in the pasuk. But Avav Yira in Chassidus is explained in different places in different ways. Even b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol ma'idecha, you will find that it will address them as corresponding to certain levels, not uniformly. In certain places in Chassidus it's addressed in one way, or it's corresponding to these three levels. And in another place in Chassidus, it explains that it corresponds to other three levels. There's also discussion whether these levels are within the animal soul, or within the godly soul, or within both, or which level pertains to the godly soul, which level pertains to the animal soul. There's also a discussion whether it's milmata lamayla or milmayla lamata, whether it's a method, the love is the person being drawn to Hashem, or is he drawing Hashem to himself, right? So it without getting lost, so to speak, in the whole sugya, I'm just pointing that out because the Rebbe is explaining here in one way. We may find, as we learn other parts of Chassidus, that Avav Yira, these various levels, are addressed in a slightly different way. So don't be surprised if you find that, because that is the case. It addresses it in different ways. Why it is like that is a separate discussion. It could be maybe because there are elements of each in each of the levels, and in different places they're focusing on different aspects of that level. That's a separate discussion. But don't be surprised, don't be confused, that's my point, if you find that in other parts of Chassidus, even in the Rebbe's Mamarim, for example, they will explain Avav Yira slightly differently, or maybe a lot differently than it is explained here as to which level corresponds to what, and so on and so forth. So v'chein hu gam be'inyan hamidus. So too it is in the area of the emotional aspects of the person in terms of serving Hashem. So there is the level of Av v'yira tiviyim, love and fear of Hashem in the natural way. Natural love and fear of Hashem. Meaning to say that a person has natural love and fear of Hashem. So this natural love and fear of Hashem, it is possible that the midas, the emotions, should be measured, limited. When is that? Vayihiyu shehergish ha'av eino mitzad hergish ha'tov, hergish tov hadavar be'etzem, ki im mitzad ha'hergish shedavar zeh tov loy. What does it mean it's limited? When the feeling that the person has, the love the person has, is not because the person feels or appreciates the good of that which he loves, the essential good of that which he loves. In this case, Hashem. So it's not because he appreciates the goodness of godliness, and that's why he has the emotion of love. That's not the case in this scenario. Ki'im, why does he love? He feels that this is something good for him. So what's the emphasis? You know, it's like the famous phrase, we say, I love you. Right? So is it you or is it I? Are you complimenting something within me, or do I really have an appreciation for you and that's what I love? So it's a question of emphasis. It's a question of focus. In this case, if it's not as a result of appreciating the good of godliness, but rather because he appreciates that godliness is good for himself, then what's he thinking about? He's thinking about his own existence, about his own being. And what's worthwhile for him? Is this worthwhile for me? Is this something which will make me feel better? Is this something that's good for me? Was is im good, says the Rebbe in Yiddish. What is good for him? Was will and was darf. What he needs and what he wants and what he needs. Right? So in this case, he happens to want and to need godliness. In this case, he happens to come to the conclusion that godliness is good for him. But what is it about? It's about him. It's not about the godliness. He just as well could decide that something else is good for him. In which case, in this case, the love is framed and limited by his existence. So what? So it's not just a notional deficiency. There is a practical consequence from this type of love, limited love. If this is the case, the person is able to come to a situation, to a condition of loving something that's opposed to Kedusha. That his love should be invested in matters, in foreign matters. Right? How is that? Vayihiyu. The kivon shegam kesheyesh li ha'ava the kedusha harehu b'mitzuyusei va'afilu b'yeshusei. For since even whilst he has the love to holiness, the person is still in his full-fledged existence, and even in his full-fledged ego, meaning to say he fully feels himself, he hasn't lost his yeshus, his ego. How do we know that he's in his full-fledged metzias and even in his full-fledged yeshus? Because why does he love? The love emanates as a result of the fact that he feels that this is good for him. So the him, the loy, the him aspect is there in full force. So it's possible that after this, on another occasion, in another scenario, he should have love in matters that are opposed to Kedusha. Right? Because what's the love about? He happens to conclude that godliness is good for him. If tomorrow one will conclude that Gashmis is good for him, or Lu'umazeh is good for him, he'll love that. And why is that? Because his Metzias and Yeshus, it's interesting how he phrases it. Harehu b'Metziusei v'afilu b'Yeshusei. In this case, his Metzias, his feeling that he exists, is there, and even the ego element is there in a full sense. It's even a greater, deeper emphasis of the self, of the awareness of the self. So this is in Ahava. So too in fear of Hashem, in this scenario, in other words, natural fear. What's natural fear? natural yiras shamayim, natural fear, is when the person is fearful of the punishment that he might get, the negative consequences that might befall him if he engages in, if he doesn't he doesn't follow Hashem's will, right? That's yiras einish. That's the very basic level of fear. That's the natural fear. Then there's yiras chet, which is a higher level, fearing the fear of the sin, meaning to say, the mere fact, the mere idea that he might sin, which means he might be far from getlichkeit, from godliness, that causes him fear. That causes him to refrain from engaging in the act, right? That's a higher level. So he says like this: so too it's in the fear of Hashem. What's the scenario that Rebbe just described in Ahava? He's still in his metzias and his yeshus, meaning to say he is lacking bittul. In other words, he's lacking bittul. He's not bottle. He loves. So there's no bittul. Yira, fear in its own, by its very nature, is the idea of bittul. When you fear, what does that mean? You are bottled to that which you fear. In other words, you're secondary. You're smaller than what you fear. So even though although yira is in a manner of bittul, nullification, more than ava, why? Because by its very nature, that's what fear is. You are nullified in relation to that which you fear. Even in yira, in fear, it is possible for it to be there, resulting from the person's metzias, from the person, rather than his bittul, rather than resulting from bittul, it should result from metzias. That's the word. Rather than the fear resulting from being bottle, it results from feeling his own metzias, from feeling his own existence. Hainu. What does that mean? Lo yiras chet. He's not afraid of the sin. Sheyore me'achet atzmei. He's afraid of the sin itself. In which case, the yira, the fear, would be resulting from bittul. That would constitute bittul. Because what does it mean when he fears the sin itself? He doesn't want to be detached from Hashem. Why? Because he's bottled to Hashem. Right? He's nullified to Hashem. So he's afraid of the sin itself. So in this case, that's not the case. Rather, he's afraid of the punishment, the negative consequences that he might have as a result of the sin. In other words, what is he protecting? What's he preserving here? His own metzias, his own existence, his own being. Right? Because he's concerned about how this is going to affect him. It's not so his metzias. It's not so much that he doesn't want to be separated from getlichkeit, that he recognizes the greatness of Hashem, and therefore he doesn't want to do anything opposed to Hashem. Rather, he says, "Oh my God, this is something that could be harmful to me, so I better stay away from it." So over here, the yira also is as a result, not so much of a result of the bittul, but it's rather as a result of what? Of his metzias, of his existence. What is the practical consequence of that? Same thing. He could then have fear from something that's not getlichkeit, that is something negative. So, for example, if someone will come and threaten him with harm, unless he engages in something which is against Hashem's will, he may fall and engage in that act. Why? Because the fear is what's harmful to me. So, in this case where he's afraid of the punishment of the Aveda. Again, so what is he preserving? His own metzias, his own being. If there will be a scenario where somebody will threaten him that he must perform an Aveda, otherwise he will harm him, and that will become more of a reality to him than the fear of the consequence of doing the Aveda, he may do against Hashem's will. Vayihiyu, meaning to say, even though during davening he has the proper contemplation and a deep contemplation into the greatness of Hashem and what it's all about. And therefore, and he's awakened with a true love and a true fear when he davens. He recognizes all of this. And it has a practical effect on him that he's awakened with a sense of love and fear of Hashem. So the deficiency, in other words, is not in the love and fear, or is not in the contemplation. It's rather in his metzias. He's not bottled, being that the person is still in his state of existence, in a state of feeling his ego. As I efsher, so during davening it's all right, but it's possible that after davening, the love and fear should now be in matters that are opposite, opposed to kedusha. This is the mode of serving Hashem in a measured way, in a limited way, as it is in serving Hashem with our emotions. And then, of course, there is the way of serving Hashem, unlimited. But the Rebbe is going to address that later on. More about all of this, Mitzvah Hashem, tomorrow morning.